Rain lashed against the windshield. Ahmed squinted, trying to see through the deluge. He was exhausted. The business trip had been longer, more grueling than he imagined. All he wanted was to be home, safe in his own bed. He'd taken a shortcut, ignoring his wife's warnings about the old country roads. "No service out there," she'd cautioned. "Stick to the highway." But the highway was clogged with traffic, and the lure of saving an hour had been too strong. Now he regretted it. The GPS had died miles back, and the road stretched before him, a dark ribbon winding through endless fields. Lightning cracked, illuminating the landscape for a fleeting moment. He drove on, his stomach clenching with each mile. He glanced at his fuel gauge. Full. He'd filled up just before leaving the city. He relaxed slightly. At least he wouldn't be stranded out here with an empty tank. A shudder ran through the car. Ahmed frowned. That wasn't right. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. He coasted to a stop on the side of the deserted road, his heart pounding in his chest. "No, no, no," he muttered, turning the key in the ignition. The engine cranked but wouldn't catch. He tried again, his frustration mounting. The only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain and the low growl of thunder in the distance. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel. He was stranded, out here, in the middle of nowhere. He reached for his phone, his lifeline to the outside world. No signal, of course. His wife's warning echoed in his ears. He was on his own. The storm intensified, the wind howling like a banshee. The darkness outside the car was absolute, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning. He couldn't stay here. He had to find help. He grabbed his jacket and got out, the wind whipping at him, instantly soaking him to the bone. He looked up and down the road. Nothing. Just endless, empty darkness. He started walking, his shoes sinking into the muddy shoulder. Each step was an effort, the wind pushing against him, trying to force him back. He shivered, the cold seeping into his bones. Fear gnawed at the edges of his mind. Time lost all meaning. He walked until his legs screamed for mercy, until his hope dwindled to a tiny flicker. He was lost, alone, and utterly terrified. Then, through the driving rain, he saw it. A light, faint, but definitely there. He stopped, his heart leaping with a surge of hope. Someone. He wasn't alone. He stumbled towards the light, his pace quickening, each step lighter than the last. As he got closer, he saw the outline of a house. Old, rambling and dark, except for that single light in a downstairs window. Relief washed over him. Safety. He didn't care what the house looked like, who lived there. He just needed shelter, needed to be out of the storm, away from the crushing darkness. He reached the front porch and pounded on the door, the sound swallowed by the fury of the storm. He waited, shivering in the cold, his clothes clinging to him like a second skin. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, cavernous hallway. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of dust and decay. He stepped inside, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. "Hello?" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" Silence met his question, only the sound of the storm raging outside. He took a tentative step forward, his heart pounding. Something wasn't right. The air felt charged, electric with a strange, unsettling energy. Then he saw it. Lying on the floor, half hidden in the shadows, was a woman. Her eyes were wide and staring, her face contorted in a silent scream. Her throat was a mangled mess. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't a safe haven, this was a nightmare. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the horrifying sight. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Who was she? What had happened here? A low moan broke the silence. He spun around, his blood turning to ice. Slumped against the wall was a man, his clothes stained with blood. He was alive, barely. His chest rose and fell, in ragged gasps, his eyes pleading for help. Ahmed took a step towards him, then stopped. Something about the scene, the man's vacant eyes, sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't right. This was all wrong. He had to get out of there. He turned to leave, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. He was frozen, paralyzed by a fear so profound it stole his breath. A sound from above broke the spell. A soft thud, like footsteps. Someone was up there, watching. He glanced back at the man, still clinging to life, then at the stairs leading to the upper floor. He couldn't just leave them here. He had to help. or at least call for help. He took a deep breath and forced himself to move. He edged past the dead woman, careful not to touch her, his stomach churning. He reached the foot of the stairs and looked up. The darkness above seemed to press down on him, suffocating him. He took a step, then another. The air grew colder, the smell of decay stronger. He reached the top of the stairs and peered down the hallway. 2 doors, both closed. Which one? He chose the one on the right. He pushed the door open slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow from the storm outside. He made out a bed, a dresser, and a small figure sitting in a rocking chair by the window. A little girl. She turned her head, her face illuminated by a flash of lightning. Her eyes were dark, bottomless pits, her lips curled into a chilling smile. "Hello," she whispered, her voice raspy, ancient. "We've been expecting you." Ahmed stumbled back, his blood running cold. This child. There was something deeply unsettling about her, something that sent shivers down his spine. He had to get out. Now! He turned and ran, his heart hammering in his chest. He could hear her voice behind him, soft, sing-song, sending chills down his spine. He didn't look back, didn't dare to. He raced down the stairs, his foot catching on the last step. He stumbled, falling, his hands scraping against something rough. He ignored the pain and scrambled to his feet, his only thought escape. He burst through the front door and into the storm, the rain stinging his face. He didn't stop running, not until he was far from the house, far from the horrors within. He collapsed on the side of the road, his chest heaving, his clothes soaked through. He was safe, for now, but he needed to call for help. He had to warn someone. He frantically searched his pockets, his heart sinking with each passing second. His phone. Where was his phone? He needed to call his wife, tell her what happened, warn her. His fingers closed around the familiar shape. He pulled it out, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold on to it. The screen was dark, dead. Of course. He closed his eyes, despair washing over him. He was trapped, alone, with the horrors of that house burned into his memory. Then, a faint glimmer of hope. A light in the distance, a car approaching. He stumbled to his feet and staggered into the road, waving his arms frantically. The car slowed, its headlights illuminating him in the darkness. He was safe. He was finally safe. Or was he? The driver's side window began to roll down, revealing the face of the little girl from the house. Her eyes, dark and cold, stared into his soul. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the roar of the storm, but he could read them clear as day. "You can't escape us." The car door swung open.